record on. So yes, we're all set, and I'll share my screen.
So are we ready? Right. Well, welcome to this session. This is about meta-analysis, which is something which we weren't going to include, but because we did all the other topics, we decided to include as well. It's an interesting topic, but it's very complex, and it's certainly not something I would suggest that junior or people who are not particularly experienced in research do, because it is quite complex. But it is a way of looking across a whole lot of papers on a similar subject and not just reviewing them, but actually getting some statistical value out of it. So let's move to the first slide, please. Form of systematic review that combines findings from a number of studies to create aggregate effect sizes. So it gets from the studies that are reported, they get an aggregate effect. To do this, the effect size is calculated and indexed, and it can be used for a number of purposes, including the effect of an intervention, for example, the effect of a drug in treating a problem, or epidemiology, substance use among children, for example. By aggregating the effects and applying statistical analysis, a better understanding may be obtained for research questions. So it's not just about reporting what all of the papers have said, it's actually about doing some statistics with it as well. But as I say, if anyone who wants to do it should be doing it probably with a statistician, because it is complex. Next slide. It's a complicated and time-consuming process, and best not undertaken by inexperienced researchers. But it adds to the understanding of science, aids treatment providers and policymakers, and it is useful because it does actually provide us with some results from that systematic review. Similar to a systematic review, but more complicated analysis and similarities with primary intervention trials, that the researcher looks across studies to determine the magnitude of effects. So we're looking across a number of different trials. What's the size of the effect of their intervention? And of course, what you find when you look at a number of different studies, there's always a huge difference in the or not huge difference, there's often a difference in the size of the effect. And it's worth following the PRISMA process to establish the framework for the review. And if you remember the PRISMA process we had in the session on writing a review paper, and it's about the way of a diagram which shows you how to select papers and which to discard, so you eventually end up with the number of papers that you are choosing to review or include in your review. Next slide. First step is to formulate the research question. Decide the keywords to use in the literature search, the date from which to include, which articles to be included, and the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And those are important things. I mean, we've talked about keywords before, and one of the things that's most important when you write your papers is to make sure that there are relevant keywords in them, because they're the ones that researchers will look up when they're looking through the databases. The date is important because you don't want necessarily to include, if it's about interventions, for example, you don't want to include something which may be 25 years old and maybe out of date. So it's quite often people would include stuff from maybe the last 10 years or something. Now, of course, sometimes you need to include stuff because it's it's older. And inclusion and exclusion criteria, you may, for example, if you're choosing to try a new drug out or a new substance out with in terms of treatment, you may exclude people with mental health problems, for example, or something like that. So you include and exclude on the basis of what you want to see. Search the databases you have chosen for articles to meet your subject and eligibility criteria, and databases are, I think they're fairly well known, fairly well used. Also, work at the reference list from the articles you've selected and other articles so far not identified. And that's always worth doing. But if you look at the reference list for a paper that's on the subject you're interested in, you may find articles that the databases haven't abstracted, and it's worth looking at those as well. Next slide. Once the articles have been identified, they'll need to be coded according to the variables chosen for the meta-analysis. So you decide what your variables are, and you need to then code them according to that. Because coding decisions are not always clear, two raters should be used to obtain a measurement of reliability, either by percentage agreement or by kappa coefficient. And the kappa coefficient is again a statistical way of looking at agreement between two sets of data. And this is what I'm saying about the complication. The coding decisions aren't always clear about how you're going to code these, so use other people in this, and it's very important that you get good agreement between the people who are doing the study. Details of each study entered onto a database with the relevant details of each study, including, for example, type of intervention, follow-up periods, sample size, type of control group, and research design. So there's all sorts of different things that will be relevant according to what the paper that you're looking at, how they conducted their research. Next slide. One of the problems in comparing a number of studies is that studies will report diverse outcomes according to the models they use. And this is one of the most difficult things I find, that you may get, I've seen studies where they comparing a study with 24 people compared to one that's got 4,000 people, or they may have used very different decisions about how to make the outcome decisions. To determine the effect sizes so that a meta-analysis is effective, common currency of effects needs to be established in order for comparison aggregation to be made. So what that means is that you need to decide, because so many studies are different in terms of how they've done it. I mean, they may be looking at the same problem, but they've undertaken them in different ways. So you need to establish, let's find a common way that we can then compare and aggregate the results we find. Finney and Moyer suggested the most common effect sizes used a standardized mean difference, odds ratio, and correlation coefficient. And we'll talk about those. Next slide. The standardized mean difference, is the difference between means on a continuous outcome variable for an intervention and a comparison condition, typically divided by the pooled standard deviation of the two groups. So you're looking at standard deviations on those two groups, and you're looking at what the outcomes are on the intervention and the comparison. That will be your control group. By using standard deviations, one can measure by how many standard deviations or what proportion of the standard deviation the intervention group is performing better than the control group. And as I say, this is why one needs to have a good knowledge of statistics to work out the standard deviations of this sort of thing before we start. Next slide. Another way of measuring effect size is by using the odds ratio. By calculating the probability of something changing divided by something not changing, a ratio may be obtained. An odds ratio of 1 would show that there's no difference between treatment and control groups, in which there are two possible outcomes. So when you get the control group and the intervention group, and you look at the difference in outcomes, and you look at there is a ratio between those results, and you use that as a one of your measures. The third method is the correlation coefficient, which can be used to express a relationship between a continuous intervention dimension and the outcome. Next slide. Once we've established the method of calculating effect sizes, and to find out where there is an effect and what the effect size is, we must now aggregate them across the studies we've reviewed. So we've established the method of calculating it, and we've seen whether there is an effect size. We're going to calculate across all the studies we've reviewed. This can be done with a fixed effects or a random effects approach. These two approaches deal with the study sampling error. With the former, that's the fixed effects, assuming that the error in estimating the population effect size comes from random factors associated with subject level sampling, whereas the latter assume that there are study sampling errors in addition to the subject level sampling errors. And I'm sorry, this all sounds a bit complicated, but it needs to be really digested over a period of time. And one of the things I meant to say at the beginning is that the book that is the text for this course, Publishing Addiction Science, is which is available free to download. There is a chapter on meta-analysis, so that you may find that worth reading after this to get a clearer idea. Next slide. A random effects model is used more frequently because of a greater generalizability, although the fixed effects model has a greater statistical power. So the random effects one is used more frequently because it's greater generalized, but it's even more used to generalize. But the fixed effects model has a bigger statistical power. Effects from larger sample sizes have less variance across studies and therefore are more precise. And that's always interesting to me, that as you get larger and larger samples in research, you get less variance in them, and therefore they are probably more accurate. To test whether the overall effect size varies from zero, it's best to use specific statistical software designed to conduct meta-analyses. And this is one of the things that, as I said, it's worth doing with people who know what they're doing, because they may have the software to undertake that. The next slide. As with systematic reviews, a table should be presented detailing all the articles included in the study and describing all of their relevant characteristics, including author, date of data collection, main outcome findings, and methods of collecting the data. And a forest plot shows that the range of findings for each study is also included, detailing the comparison, the range of effects of an intervention. And a forest plot is where you have a line and it shows the range within that line of what the findings are. What you find with meta-analyses is quite often the tables are enormous because they present so much data in terms of what people have found from the papers they've reviewed, and it's just quite a big thing to publish. Next slide. Issues to consider. One may have to determine whether the effect sizes vary more than could be expected with subject level sampling fluctuations in a fixed effect model or in a random effect model, whether the study level random effects, there are study level random effects in addition to subject level sampling fluctuations. So you have to determine from the method you've used whether there are effects that have come in from the other side. Are there additional factors that add variation in effect sizes explained by moderator variables? And these can include different methods from the participants across the studies and the interventions themselves. And one of the things that you will often find, of course, if you're looking at studies on a certain subject, is that each study will be done differently, with slightly different methods, of a slightly different subject pool. They may have less one gender than another, or maybe an age-related thing, all sorts of different things you find. So you very rarely find two different studies that will be so similar that you can compare them easily. To test this, a homogeneity test can be used that will test whether excess variation exists. Next slide. Another problem is publication bias. If the articles are carefully selected from peer-reviewed journals and conform to the criteria for inclusion, there is still the problem that studies that show no positive or neutral effects are not published, either because researchers do not submit for publication or because papers are rejected for publication. Therefore, articles that refute the research question may not be included in the database's search, and therefore the results may be skewed. And this is a really important thing, and it's one thing as an editor that I think is really important. If you've done a study and it's been well conducted, and you don't get the results that you expect, you can still publish it, because one of the things that we as that slide shows, that if there is a negative effect or there's no positive thing, people will assume it won't be published, or maybe the journal will reject it because it doesn't show anything new. But in fact, these papers are really important because they add to the balance of whether a research question is valid or not. So if you do research and it doesn't have a positive or a neutral outcome, don't be afraid to submit it, because it could still be very valuable in terms of overall understanding of things. And certainly, in our field, there's been so many controversies about addiction and how we treat it. And if you look back on stuff from 50 years ago, there's all sorts of stuff which you think, oh, well, that was not very valid. So it is worth this sort of, if you do get papers, if you do have research which doesn't have very positive results, please, please make sure you submit it, because it's very important. Next slide. Selection of articles need to be done with great care. Only quantitative articles may be included, because qualitative articles will not contribute to statistical outcome. And if the criteria are too strict, then the number of articles on which to base the analysis may be too small. So you can only include quantitative articles because they'll be the only ones that have a statistical outcome. and although the qualitative ones will be interesting, they can't contribute to that statistical outcome. And if the criteria are too strict, with the number of articles on which to base the analysis is too small, then you can't really make a decision based on a very small number of papers. However, on the other hand, if the selection criteria are too wide, you may then include studies of poor quality that would affect the outcome of the meta-analysis. So it's about, when you think about this, it's about what the criteria that you want to include to make sure that you get sufficient number of articles, and that you, but they're not too many. Next slide. The other problem with selection of articles may be agenda bias, where the authors of the meta-analysis want to choose the result, want to use the results to support a specific issue, and may cherry pick the articles they include. And this is something that we've talked about before, about when people, for example, are writing the introduction to their research, and they only include papers that agree with them. You need to include studies that do not have the results that you expect or that you want, provided they're of good quality. Then they are important to include as well. Meta-analysis is complicated, and the analysis of variance across articles is complex. Therefore, it's always beneficial to get good statistical advice and to use an established statistical package for analysing the data. And that's what I really will reinforce with people, that it is a very complex process, and you need someone that has good statistical knowledge and the good statistical packages to deal with it. The next slide.
Yeah.
That is meta-analysis. So I apologize if it was complicated, because it is a complicated subject. But as I say, if you want to go to the Publishing Addiction Science, there is a chapter on meta-analysis which you can then go through, and it will be more comprehensive than my presentation. So that is certainly worth doing. So although we've mentioned it before, Carly, I'm sure we can put in the reference to the book again.
Oh, yes. I send that every time. I hope people are using it. It's a great resource, and it's free.
Yes, it is. And we're delighted that it is free, because we found a publisher and certainly the third edition, I've got a cat on my lap now. The third edition is which is the one we use now, is very comprehensive, and I think we're very proud to have produced it, because it's also, actually, although it's publishing addiction science, a lot of the work in it is about publishing any science, and that's the point of the workshops that we do. That's true of any science, the same sort of principles, even though we're mainly talking about addiction. When I've talked at my own university, I've done sessions on people who are PhD students or junior staff, nothing to do with addiction, and they've benefited immensely. So it's about science rather than addiction science. get my cat to say hello to you. Hey, hello, everyone.
Well, I have lots of questions, but I know that we want to allow our folks who joined us today to ask their questions about meta-analysis and also just in general, Dr. Pates, about publishing.
Yes, one of the things I wanted to use this session for is not just the meta-analysis, but for anything from the last, well, from the whole 8 sessions. And one thing I will reinforce is if you want to come back to me after we finish this, because this is the last webinar in the series, but if you've got my email address, I'll always respond to you and be very happy to do so, because you've been a lovely group of people to work with, and I will be very happy to continue giving you any advice or help that I can. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Stephen.
You had indicated some time back that we can be able to participate in reviewing articles for your journal.
Yes.
How do we go about that?
If you just email me and say you'd like one, I would certainly be very happy to send you one. And what we always do is we try to send reviews out, papers out to 2 or 3 reviewers. So if it's new to you, then we won't necessarily make that decision just on your review. It will be based on 2 or 3 reviews. But I always find that people who are beginning to do it are usually very good, because you are all experienced people, you're all working in the field. So just email me and say, I would be interested in reviewing a paper, and I'll send you something. It may take a little while, because it will be sent out by my assistant. So it won't be from me, but I'll be very happy to do that. So thank you, Stephen. I'm glad you reminded me of.
And Dr. Pates, I put your email address in the chat box, but I just want to make sure it's Dr._Pates23.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been that way for about 20 years. Do we have other thoughts or questions? As I say, it can be related to anything that we've had or anything that you think about in publishing your work. I'll be happy to respond to it.
Thank you, Dr. Pates.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in this meta-analysis. That we can actually review you can do a systematic review of different papers, and then we analyze the results, and then we can also publish it. So it doesn't have to be the ones where we have gone to the ground to collect the data and then publish. So we can even just do a systematic review, do a table, present the details, and then from there we even review the papers.
Yes, that's right, Gladys. Yeah, and it's actually really important, because one of the things that I'm sure we all know is if you're doing a new piece of research, you always look and see what else has been published on the topic, and those review papers are so useful. Systematic review is so useful. So yes, and certainly a good systematic review will not have the results of a meta-analysis, but it will include a discussion of those results. And I think those are really important, because, as I say, the meta-analysis is about putting numbers on it, but actually a good review will highlight the papers and what they represent. So very important. So thank you for that.
I have another question, Dr. Pates. Thank you. I hope there are not many.
Yep.
So what you're saying is, even for our papers, like even after reviewing, doing this systematic review, and we find that maybe there is no effect. Once we have analyzed the data and you find that maybe it is like it has no effect on what you expected to have. You can still publish it and show that it didn't have any effect.
Yes, and I think those are really important because, as I said, one of the problems is that if you want to do some research into whether something works or not, you'll find that nearly all the papers that are published will be those that say, yes, there was a positive effect. But there may have been lots of papers published, which are good papers and they're good research. They didn't find the same results, but they won't have been published. So I'm very keen as an editor that providing the research is good, that I will publish those papers because I think it contributes to science. And one of the other things you find is that if you start out with a new system, I mean, if you go back to the days of thinking when methadone was first introduced or something like that, what you always find is the first papers that are published have much bigger effect sizes than later publications. So actually, it's worth knowing that the effect size will probably diminish as people actually probably improve the science and actually get better research design. So very important question, Gladys, and I'm really glad you asked that because I think it is very important that we actually do include those papers. Sorry, I'm struggling with the cat thing.
Dr. Pates, I have a really basic question. But when you first started talking about meta-analysis, I thought that would mean that you would get the raw data from the original researchers. But as you spoke, I don't think that's what happens. So you're saying you don't typically have individual level data. You're using the data that they published in their study?
That's right, yeah. You use the data that's been published and then you aggregate that across. And of course, as I said in the presentation, one of the problems is that you may be looking at different levels of data in terms of, say, different numbers. You may have one study that has 24 people, one that has 4,000, or all sorts of different things. But no, to do with the raw data would be pretty impossible.
Right, all the data sharing agreements and privacy and all of that, I can imagine would be difficult.
I mean, one of the things is that once you've published a paper, if I write a paper or you write a paper and you publish it, the copyright then belongs to the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you as an academic can use that and quote it, as long as you, as we've said right at the beginning of these studies, as long as you reference it properly. And the point about referencing is that you're giving acknowledgement of where you got this data from, this information from. So in terms of that data, it's not about the raw data, it is about the published data, the published findings, so it's the aggregation of those findings, the findings that have already been published. So good question, Carla, thank you. Do you have other questions, other thoughts? And as I say, you can anything to do with the sessions that we've done, because we've been doing this since March. Is March, is it? Or May, is it? April, May, I can't remember when we started now, but
We started in Abu Dhabi, and I'm trying to remember.
indeed we did.
That March?
Yeah, I can't remember now. But we've covered a lot of ground since then, and I'm very grateful to you all for sticking with us and being there. And I just hope this has been worth it for you, because it's been certainly, Harley and I think have enjoyed working with you. And as I say, don't think that's the end of it. If you want to keep in touch with me, and I was glad of Stephen's point about reviewing, just email me personally. And any other questions about research that you think I might be able to help, then I'd be pleased to do that.
Very good. And just one thing I wanted to offer as we're wrapping up, I'll put this in my email, as I always do, send out the link to the whole series if you want to watch it, the textbook, remind you of that offer to review with Dr. Pates, but also if you'd like a certificate of attendance, I'll put that in there and you can email me to request that. I can provide that as well. And for those of you who joined a little bit late, I also invited you to a September 6th event for ICU DDR and a related topic, which is about publishing your first research or a small research study, how to continue that research, and also how to communicate with policymakers. So there's a link in the chat box if you think it's something you'd be interested in. And Dr. Pates, I want to say thank you so much. I have learned an incredible amount from this series, and it's been a pleasure to work with you.
Well, thank you, Carl. It's been a pleasure to work with you too, and it's been a pleasure to work with everyone. And as I say, I hope it's been clear. I think that there's quite a lot of complicated things, and if there's anything that's not clear, you can either get it from the book or you can come back to me and say, I didn't understand that. And I want to say a huge thank you to Carly as well for the magnificent organising of this. And I've had huge technology problems over the last few weeks, and Carly has come to my rescue, otherwise you wouldn't have got that presentation the last couple of times. So thank you, Carly. It's been such a pleasure working with you, and I hope we will do so many years in the future.
So thank you, Dr. Pate. I have also learned a lot of things. Like today, I've been able to now differentiate between the how to write a systematic reviews that we did some times back, and then now a meta-analysis. So which means now if I choose to write a meta-analysis, then I will have to look at the data, and maybe now I have to analyze and then write a review. And then for the other, the systematic review, so I'll only be reviewing the books, the research design, and that kind of thing. So I want to really appreciate, I appreciate today's session. It has actually brought to light several things. I also want to appreciate Carly. Carly, thank you so much. You have been reminding us several times about these meetings so that we continue putting them in our diaries. Thank you so much. We really have learned a lot, and then it has been a great pleasure working with the two of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know you're all very busy people, so I try not to pester, but I do like to send reminders.
Yes, and we have enjoyed it. It has kept us going. Thank you so much. We will miss you, and I hope now the fact that we are finishing doesn't also mean that we cannot be maybe asking a few questions or maybe connecting in one way or another. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, the invitation to connect always stands. It sounds like it does for Dr. Pates, and
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
speak for myself and ICU DDR as well.
And if I'm ever in your countries, I would love to come and meet you, because I do
Yes.
we do go abroad at times, and we have meetings at different places. So it's been wonderful to actually be able to work. You know, it's only technology that lets us meet with people from different countries, different continents, even. You know, so that's terrific. Thank you.
For me, I want to appreciate.
Sorry.
Pete, I want to appreciate. I've been doing a study that is funded by ICDDR, and I'm really considering to submit my article to this journal. So I'm just starting to draft, but I'll be able to submit so that I can see if I publish with you. It has really been a good journey, and I hope we will be consulting more. And thank you for leaving that space open that we can consult.
No,
So then Kali, we will also meet and chat the way forward. I know there are a few things remaining as we wind up the grant, so we will be following up also to get a word from you.
Yes.
and I'll be delighted with that, Stephen. Thank you very much. Because as I say, I think some of the things we presented over these 8 sessions have been quite complicated. Certainly today's session is complicated, and you know, there is the resource of the book, but you know, I'm always happy to come back to you, you know, with anything that you need that I can help with. So, and I always feel that once we've done a class like this, that we are colleagues together, all of us. You know, we're international colleagues, and although I may be older than the rest of you and therefore have had the experience of doing this stuff, I've been in the same situation over the years. So it's just lovely to be, you know, part of people's careers.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pates. We appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining. Be well.
So are we finishing there?
I think so, unless we have, I don't see any open microphones. I'm always watching for that in case somebody else has something to share.
Okay.
We do have a note in our chat from Farida saying thank you so much, and also from Maria.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for those comments. I really appreciate those as well. Thank you.
Right. Be well.
Okay, bye-bye then. And please keep in touch. Okay. Bye.
We will keep in touch.